So I guess,
come on, Brian.
I guess this is the awkward pause,
This is the awkward pause where I go, come on, Brian, why don't you ask Mick a question?
Yeah, no, it's like David's like pointing at me.
There's our outtake for this episode.
And there's our outtake.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of The Cloud Whisperers. I'm David Broussard.
And I'm Brian Cheatham, and I'm right on target. Right on
target. And this is episode 35, which is awesome. So
that's half of 70.
Half of 70, exactly. I mean, it's a little bit more than a third of the way to 100, so we have to think about it this way. So, Brian, what have you been up to lately?
On that note, I am a half a century old tomorrow, so I'm turning 50.
And are you doing anything fun for your 50th birthday?
Yes, we have several things planned. We are going to the lake in June, and we're taking a bunch of friends with us, so we have a weekend planned for that.
That's in June. What are you doing tomorrow, this weekend?
I'm working, David.
Oh, well, there we go.
I'm working.
That's perfect for a 50th birthday.
That's perfect. I'm actually
seems right to me.
Finding a new or a plug-in to the task manager that I've already been using to manage my doctor's appointments that are coming up. Not to spin this in a negative way, but I mean, I need to start thinking about and scheduling all of these doctor's appointments.
Oh, yes. Now that you're 50, you get to have the colonoscopy.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm scared for that for many different reasons.
It's not that bad.
It's not that bad.
The procedure itself, you just sleep right through it, and it's fine.
That scares me enough.
It's the 12 hours before that when you can't get more than 5 feet away from the toilet because you've taken the nastiest stuff in the world, unless you happen to like diet sodas or, as I say, flat tab, because that's what it tasted like. It tasted like a flat tab. I was able to chug it down without any difficulty. My poor wife can't drink diet drinks at all, and she just she lost it this last time and threw up in the bathroom because she couldn't stand the taste of this stuff. But the prep, not fun. The colonoscopy itself, like I said, you're asleep, and by the time you wake up, you're just like, okay, I'm going home now. I mean, there's no lasting after effects or anything.
So what you're telling me is I can actually work remotely while I prep. You
could.
Do I need some sort of cover for my laptop? I mean,
you do. Yeah. I would recommend a sanitary cover for the laptop because let's just say that we're going to leave it at that. You know, and speaking of leaving it at that, because we're going to talk about what I've been up to lately.
Am I scaring you at this point, David?
I'm just thinking about the comments that we'll get on this episode, and stuff like that. But with me, we're recording this podcast on a Tuesday. My eldest is actually graduating from St. Mary's University on Saturday. And as soon as they're done, they've already started applying for teaching positions because they're going to teach English, language, and reading, ELAR, between 7th and 12th grade. And even as easy it is to get a job as a teacher these days, it looks like she might end up teaching middle school as opposed to high school. But then again, she's also looking for something that's close to the house. So she doesn't want to drive an hour each way to get to her job. And we're looking at school districts that are adjacent to us. And it still may happen that she gets a job at a high school level. We don't know. But, she may end up teaching 7th and 8th graders English, which there's nothing particularly wrong with that either. So we're very excited about it. By the time you guys are listening to this podcast, she will have walked across the stage, and she's graduating with honors, and she's summa cum laude. And it's just an amazing thing to have seen. As we have, and then my son is finishing up his junior year and will be starting his senior year next year. So I know, crazy stuff.
Proud Papa moments, man. I love it.
They are definitely proud Papa moments. So, Brian, we have brought in a special guest today, a friend of mine that I work with by the name of Mick Talbott. And whenever I have an infrastructure question, it doesn't matter what it is, I reach out to Mick because Mick is a font of useful information. I personally was tagged with the moniker of font of useless information at a prior job, but Mick is the font of useful information. So, Mick, welcome to the Cloud Whisperers.
Thanks. It's been fun so far.
It's great to have you on our podcast. And so, Mick, you and I have worked together for many years. What I'm curious is, how did you kind of get into IT consulting? What kind of brought you into IT consulting?
That's a good story. So I was working at a rock station, at a radio station, working on my journalism degree because, nobody in IT has an IT degree. And I oversaw...
I have a history degree.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
So at that time, and this is 1980 something, I won't even say like how far back that was. And I got to witness and live through digital transformation when the very visionary general manager of my radio station saw the future of computerized records and digital records replacing, at that time, the catalog of the radio station. What made one station sound different from another radio station was literally index cards in a recipe box. Oh. And how many cards were in each section determined what was the rotation, the speed of the rotation of the playlist. And there was a secret recipe that every station had of so many from this section and then X number from this other section. And that's what made the radio station sound distinct and different from all the other radio stations.
And so he now works for Clear Channel, right?
Right. Oddly enough.
And now all the stations sound the same.
He followed me into corporate IT, right?
Oh, okay.
Crazy world. So my visionary manager boss guy, great mentor at the time, was still a college student, recall. He was like, I see a future of computers digitizing this stuff. And we didn't have the storage or the hardware yet to digitize music. This is way before MP3s, but it was taking the catalog, the music catalog, and making it electronic. And then we could do these crazy things that used to take hours of interns, like, hey, I want to see how many songs do we have that are the Rolling Stones, right? Or can we rearrange our catalog and say how many titles do we have that are with this label or this other label, right? And those used to be really, really like hours and hours of labor to answer those simple questions. On a computer, you can just say, well, sort by this column, right? Way easier. And we went shopping for a solution. There were no off-the-shelf solutions at that point because the PC had just come out. We're talking like DOS days, right? And IBM PC starting to show up in the business world. And in that Wild West days, there really were no commercial off-the-shelf vertical solutions for radio or music catalogs. So I became a developer and I wrote one. Wow. In what was the platform DBase, like DBase 3+ in those days.
I was going to say GW Basic? What? No.
Right?
No, DBase.
Right? Yeah. But it was very much a roll your own, bring your own kind of database platform. So I had to design the schema, right? And all the rows and the columns. And I had to design the screen input forms to do the data entry and all of the presentation layer. The whole thing was all kind of roll your own platform. And that's how I got into IT from the music side of the business and radio. And from there, we actually became consultants. We went on the road and sold the solution to other radio stations and helped them to install it and integrate it. And that was, looking back, that was the start of my IT career as both as a consultant with the professional services and as a developer.
So why is that still not your career? This is the best how did I get into IT story I've ever heard.
So awesome. I will say that when you party with rock stars every day as like a day job, you get a little burned out,
Oh, gotcha.
And I was looking for something that was a little bit more corporate and a little bit less rock and roll, as it's fun to go to a concert once in a while, right? But when you do like 3 a week and that's your day job, you're like, man, I need a break, right? This is, exhausting. So I was looking for more of a corporate 9-to-5 job, right? With less, let's go talk to the bar owner at 3 a.m. after the club shuts down kind of thing as my day job, right?
Yeah, that's okay, Mick. I'm going to call you after this, so we'll figure something out.
But that led to corporate IT and working for various banks and energy utilities and things and in and out of consulting for a long time. And I've been now a full-time consultant now in my most recent chapter since about 15 years now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, excellent. After my own heart, music infrastructure, I love it. I love every second of it. On the infrastructure side of things, that's actually where David and I got our start, with this podcast. David was doing kind of the Microsoft 365 thing, and I was still kind of stuck in the infrastructure side of things, still kind of am stuck in the infrastructure side of things, and I'm figuring out how to get that train down the track to where we are in cloud and all that. And, that kind of leads us to where I think what we wanted to talk about today, more or less is, how do we get there? How do we get to cloud? And I think one of the things that always comes up is, how do we get rid of on-premises Active Directory? How do we do that from an enterprise perspective? How do we do that even from a small business perspective? So I'd like to kind of hear your take on that and where you think the future of that is for enterprise, because I know I have a take on it from a small and medium business perspective.
Yeah, good question. So I've been looking at that for quite a long time, as I've been working outside of my day job supporting small businesses, some nonprofits and things like that are more in that SMB market. There were very few companies 10 years ago, 15 years ago that really could not need an Active Directory, right? It was kind of universal. If you needed authentication and directory services, or running a lot of on-prem apps, even in a small business, right? That was kind of essential. But we're at a point now, there's some really interesting developments around the Azure M365 cloud side of things, real recently in the last year or so, that are really making it to a point now where normal customers can seriously see the end of the road of on-prem Active Directory and have a clear path to get to cloud native identities in Azure AD, and still provide some legacy backwards compatibility for their legacy on-prem apps, and not have to be in the business of hosting and securing and managing Active Directory anymore.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think what I've witnessed is the limitations are really around the storage side of things, right? And what people are accessing from a data perspective. This is from a small business. I'm coming from a small, medium business mindset, right? Where SharePoint storage, you get 1 to 5 terabytes of OneDrive storage, depending upon what license you have, right? And then for SharePoint, as a whole, you get a terabyte plus, 10 gigabytes per user or something like that. So if I have 25 users or 50 users or whatever, I'm like 1.5 terabyte maybe. And then it's 20 cents for every gigabyte on top of that. So I start thinking about the storage aspect of that or whatever. And that's where I've seen a lot of the people kind of throwing up their hands going, okay, well, I really don't know how I can do this. Brian, help me get from here to here. And in some cases, we even bring in third party or whatever. So I'd kind of like to get your take on what options are available from a Microsoft perspective, or maybe even what could be coming. Azure Files and, support for Azure AD and things like that. Just things that we're running into in the small business world, help us out. Throw somebody a line.
The big takeaway from that is it's not a one size fits all. They have one offering, right? There's a range of options that you want to talk through and see, is this a good fit for your needs? Maybe it's a combination of things, right? And by things, I mean collaboration content storage. So you have this quota of free space through whatever combination of SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, that kind of storage. And there's a fair amount of that. And you can have policy around there with retention policies, right? And help to get rid of some of the old stuff that's not used. But there's also Azure Files. And Azure Files now has multiple personalities in the same way that a lot of on-prem enterprise storage does, right? So you can present it as blob storage if you've got, modern cloud apps that can use that effectively. But you can also present it as an SMB file share. So it works just like a regular Windows file share. Yeah. But you don't have to run that compute overhead of running a file server in an Azure virtual machine or AWS or whatever. So you can just run it as a SMB file share. And again, a couple of years ago, it was clunky because of identities. You would have to connect to the Azure storage account with some sort of an Azure storage key, right, or some other kind of credential, and it wasn't integrated with your Azure AD identity and all of your RBAC permissions, group memberships, and things like that, like you're used to with on-prem file and print, whether it's third party or Microsoft. And they've bridged all those gaps now. So if you're presenting Azure Azure file storage now as SMB file storage. You can actually have ACLs and permissions on there. Users can authenticate to that Azure storage with their Azure AD identity, which if you're still running an on-prem Active Directory is typically synced, right, with Azure AD Connect sync up to the Azure cloud identity. And if you've managed to break the dependency on your on-prem Active Directory, if you're running cloud native identities, you're in Azure AD already. So there's lots of options there.
Behind the scenes too is it's tiered storage, right? So it takes all the stuff that hasn't been accessed in a while and it automatically puts it on cold storage and everything. So you're not paying as much. And I mean, some of that stuff happens dynamically, which is pretty cool. And we've looked at the option of Azure Files and I think where that's really going to become like wide open as an option for everyone is when they figure out how to make it support just an Azure AD join, right? As soon as we get to that point to where, we don't have to have any kind of Kerberos authentication, right? And I know we're getting nerdy here, David, but we don't have any kind of Kerberos authentication, I think is where we're really going to, so that's going to open wide open for
Kerberos. I hate Kerberos. I've been wrestling back in the day of setting up SharePoint farms.
Yeah, I'm with you right there. I was a VAX sysadmin before there was a Windows, and I was wrestling with this MIT Kerberos thing, and I thought, God, this is the most crazy, convoluted, complicated thing I've ever seen. Like, who would do that, right? Well, it turns out it's pretty useful, and Active Directory has made it really easy to use Kerberos, but it's been around a really long time. Yeah. So the bridge is already there, Brian. So there's a new service. Well, it's not that new, but the plumbing is coming together. Active Directory Domain Services.
Yes.
It's all the classic things that you love about Active Directory, but in a Microsoft managed cloud hosted Active Directory.
Yeah.
And specifically, the real value proposition it brings there is to provide those legacy authentication providers, especially Kerberos and LDAP as well, to a native Azure-based cloud solution. So things that are not native to Azure AD, which is all about modern authentication, right? If you want to do SAML, you want to do OAuth, Azure AD does those things beautifully. But if you're like, well, we still have an application that needs to map a file share, or we're trying to authenticate to a SharePoint on-prem farm, or whatever, on-prem, we have a help desk ticketing system, whatever, that's using Active Directory authentication, whether that's, Kerberos or LDAP or NTLM. Now you have an option not just to run some domain controllers in Azure virtual machines, but you have an option to bring those identities in a very easy, automated, synced way from on-prem Active Directory through Azure AD and into Azure AD Domain Services, where then you can still provide those things like Kerberos authentication to your storage, and then you don't have that dependency on Active Directory on-prem anymore.
And then there's a sync between the Azure AD and the Azure ADDS, right?
Exactly.
Azure Active Directory Domain Services.
So initially, when you're starting out, you're syncing your identities. In fact, if you're doing Microsoft 365, if you have Exchange Online, if you're using Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint already in Microsoft 365, you're already doing the first part of you've set up your Azure AD Connect sync, you're syncing your on-prem identities and groups into Azure AD. You're doing that already if you're using any of the collaboration services. So now we can stand up a new managed instance of a Azure ADDS domain, and it will sync those same identities automatically from Azure AD into this managed domain. And and it's full sync, so it'll sync passwords and everything, UPNs. It's all this same sync stuff. So a user can authenticate to this managed domain with the same username or email address and password that they're used to using with on-prem, and it's all kind of transparent to the user. They're not even really aware that the domain that they're getting a Kerberos ticket from is a different domain. All they know is I put in my username and password and it worked, right?
Yeah, and you get three different identity systems you're synchronizing now. That's really kind of one. Yeah, so it's
and it's not ideal to leave it that way, but it's a stepping stone to get to cloud native. So once you get all of your identities synced up, all of your groups synced up, you start swinging over your workstations and your servers that are domain joined still, or hybrid Azure AD joined for a lot of the desktops. Once you get those moved over to the managed domain in Azure, or you move them off of Active Directory domain joined entirely, they just become cloud managed, cloud native Azure AD joined endpoints. Once all that's done, you can flip those identities from Active Directory on-prem to be cloud-native Azure AD identities. And then you're done with Active Directory. And you can still have your legacy applications, your technology debt that still needs LDAP authentication or directory services, Kerberos. You still have that provided natively through Microsoft managed cloud services.
Yeah, and then you can do Azure Virtual Desktop or whatever at that point to
makes it even
publish
easier
those
to bring
apps.
that in.
Yeah. So
Windows 365, Azure Virtual Desktop, depending on how much of that infrastructure you want to manage and how much you want it to be more of a SaaS turnkey solution. You've got a range of options.
So especially for smaller organizations, that idea of getting rid of having on-premise hardware, right, is kind of a goal. I don't, they may be a bunch of boxes that are sitting in a closet someplace, but I want to get rid of them. And so there's obviously Azure AD is one of them, but the other one that I've heard people talk about that you can't seem to get rid of is an on-premise Exchange server, right? And that's really not just one server, it's like 4, because you have to have the edge server and you have to have the internal server and you have to have 2 of each kind of thing. And that seems to me to be the thing that would be the next big hard thing to get rid of. And my understanding, and I'm not an Exchange administrator, I just play one on the internet sometimes, is that the whole reason for that is so you can run PowerShell against it and manipulate the Exchange without having to go through running PowerShell against Exchange Online and trying to manage it through the Exchange Online interfaces. And I get that, but it seems to me for smaller organizations, that's plenty. You don't need to have those boxes anymore.
So today, and it's at an awkward evolutionary stage of Exchange going to Exchange Online, there's really only 2 use cases that we really have right now for Exchange Hybrid. Once all of your mailboxes for user mailboxes are moved up to Exchange Online, and almost everybody's done that years ago by now, right? Very few companies are still running mailboxes for standard users on-prem. So assuming that your mailboxes are in Exchange Online, you have some sort of a hybrid setup today, no matter how big or small your company is. The 2 big use cases that I see daily in my consulting practice are one around the management of those email attributes that you're mentioning, David. You needed to set a vanity email address for somebody. They wanted Dave dot instead of David dot, right? Or you wanted to add them to permissions on a shared mailbox or things like that. And today, it's really just a kind of a Microsoft sort of legacy requirement that if you have identities based in Active Directory on-prem, that you must manage those email attributes in Exchange on-prem management tools because the identities are sourced from on-prem Active Directory. If you have, even in the same tenant, if you have other identities, you have like consultants maybe or contractors, vendors that have cloud-native Azure AD identities at the same time that you have Exchange Hybrid, you can totally manage those recipients in the native Microsoft 365 Admin Center or Exchange Online PowerShell. And there used to be some extra hoops to jump through with Exchange Online PowerShell, with remote PS session and all that stuff. And we're through all that now. There's a really cool, the Exchange Online management module, version 3. It works natively with modern authentication. So it works with MFA and all that kind of stuff for an interactive authentication. And then you have the similar, shall we say, you have comparable commandlets to work with recipients and email addresses and secondary addresses and all that stuff in Exchange Online as you do with Exchange on-prem. So that's one big use case that still kind of requires an on-prem Exchange footprint. You have to keep all patched and up to date and worry about cumulative updates and stuff. Sometimes you find yourself thinking like, oh, hey, I saw there was a really important security patch. I got to install it right now this week, but we're too behind on the cumulative updates. So I got to do the cumulative update installer to get it, to where I can install this month's patch kind of thing. So that's one big use case that's driving that on-prem Exchange footprint is managing recipients. And the answer is get those identities out of Active Directory, get them to be cloud native Azure AD identities. And then you have all the modern tools of the Exchange Admin Center in the M365 Admin Center and or the Exchange Online PowerShell that's a lot easier to get into and sign into than it used to be. And the other use case is relaying email from on-prem applications that need to send and generate emails from SharePoint farms, from SQL servers, from those kind of things that need to send emails. And that has been a commodity SaaS solution for a really long time, right? You have all these things that we're using for good or for evil, for direct marketing, mailing purposes, right? We've got MailChimp and we've got SendGrid and some of those that are already turnkey SaaS solutions. So the answer is, get out of that business. You don't need to have Exchange route those messages and deal with the authentication and things from on-prem to the cloud. You can use a turnkey SaaS solution to handle the relaying of SMTP messages that you need to from on-prem applications until those on-prem applications themselves get modernized and become a cloud SaaS solution or some sort of IaaS platform or something where you have other options for email at that point.
Okay. Well,
so if you handle those two things, if you get your identities out of Active Directory and make them cloud native, and you find another SMTP email solution for your on-prem apps, you can totally get rid of your entire on-prem Exchange hardware and footprint.
Wow, that would be awesome.
I think
and sleep
Microsoft
better,
also
right?
gets
less patching parties.
I think Microsoft also gets a lot of mudslinged their way when it comes to, the one-way synchronization and, not being able to do two-way synchronization. And people that have been in identity and understand that and been doing that for years, we always say source of authority, right? And we always say, hey, there's a reason that we have that. Otherwise, you've got a loop.
And to be fair, it is a two-way sync.
All kinds of things. Yep.
Yeah, already with Azure AD Connect Sync, it is a two-way sync. But to your point of where is the source of authority for each user, if the user is sourced from Active Directory on-prem, then Exchange on-prem is authoritative for those email attributes for that user. Same tenant, same time, a different cloud-native user, again, like a consultant or vendor or somebody that you've made as a cloud-native login, their email attributes are authoritative in Azure AD. So it's not the tenant, it's the user and where their identity is sourced from.
Yeah, very well put. Very well put.
Well, Mick, you are, as I said, a font of useful information. But Brian, it is that time again. You know what time it is, right, Brian?
It's one last thing or one time.
That's exactly
for
right.
thing.
I'm flabbergasted. You got it right. Yay! It's only taken us 35 episodes. All right. So Brian and Mick, our one last thing for today is we thought it'd be fun to talk about The Mandalorian because season 3 is over. I have watched all of season 3. Mick, I think you said you just started watching season 3, and Brian, you haven't started watching it all, right?
Well, no, actually, I'm on episode, I think 2 or 3. So give me some credit.
There we go. We've watched the whole thing, and there will be another season, which is nice. That wasn't a guarantee. And I heard they had 2 endings filmed to be ready in case there was a season 3 and there wasn't a season 4 and there wasn't a season 4. But all in all, it was a very satisfying story, albeit a little bit slower, not because they wanted to tell the story slower, although they did, but more, I think, because they just have so many plot lines now with different groups of people. If you think about season 1, it was Mando. It was all about Mando because it was the Mandalorian. And even season 2, there was a fair chunk of just Mando. And when you even got to Book of Boba Fett, there were 2 episodes that were the pilot for season 3 of Mando, right? But this season, we had stuff with Bo-Katan, and we had stuff with Grief Karga, and we had stuff with the spies, and we had stuff with Moff Gideon, and you're like, and all this stuff going on, I think detracted a little bit from the focus that we've been used to in the previous seasons, where you were really laser focused in on Grogu and Mando and what they were doing. And now, of course, I will admit everyone but my daughter is really shipping Bo-Katan and Mando, right? Din Djarin, right? We're all like, those 2 are going to become like the Empress and Emperor of Mandalorians, right? And my daughter's just like, no, I hate this. But, so I don't know. What do you guys think about my theory?
It took me, I had to go back and watch like the Book of Boba Fett to understand how Mando even ended up with Grogu to begin with. So that's kind of where I'm at, and just
and the cool starfighter, the cool
exactly.
Naboo starfighter, right?
Yeah, that thing is amazing. Yeah. That's kind of where I'm at with it right now, and I haven't really gotten to the other plots and storylines and everything that are developing. But my son and
what about the scaredy cat R5 droid?
Yeah, no, that's. I love the droids. I love the fact that Mando hates droids still. It's like he slowly but surely he's coming around. But he's still kind of. I don't know. I don't know about you droids. You droid people.
Well, Mick, have you gotten far enough along where you've actually seen what they've done with IG-11 for Grogu?
Yes.
Oh yes, no. Yeah.
I love that.
Not to spoil it too much for you, Brian, but he gets Grogu gets a little yes and no button that he can press.
And
have the droid say yes or no, and you can just imagine giving a toddler a button that says yes or no.
that one is really special to me. I have a special needs daughter who is nonverbal, and we have those buttons, and it was awesome seeing Grogu with the yes and the no buttons, and I loved that. It was great, just like in my own household.
That is awesome. We had a friend of ours. I was gonna say we had a friend of ours also had special needs son, and he was also nonverbal. He didn't have the buttons, but he had pictures, and he'd run to the fridge and he would point at what he wanted, kind of thing. So yeah. Very, very, very cool stuff.
Yeah, Grogu
Brian,
changed all of it. Yeah, he changed all of that. It's just I love. Oh yeah, I love the addition of that character and what they've done with that. That's why a lot of people watch the show. It's about the story
to see what he's going to eat next.
Yeah, exactly. What's he going to eat next? What's he going to do next? But it makes it relatable for everyone, right? That's what's really cool about it, right? So I think that's
at least. Parents of toddlers, people who have raised toddlers, we get Grogu. We get that 18-month-old who's not really quite talking yet, but is getting into everything. And you tell them to stop, and they're just like, "Make me,"
Right.
Yeah.
So now you guys have not watched Bad Batch, have you? Have you not?
I think my son has.
It's Dave Filoni. It's the same guy who does. So Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni do Mandalorian, and Dave Filoni is going to have one of the new 3 Star Wars movies that he's putting out. Bad Batch is actually a continuation of the Clone Wars animated series, which Dave Filoni had done. It follows this group of clone troopers that were genetically altered to have differences. So instead of being the same as everybody else, they have different levels and different, like one of them is huge. His name is Wrecker. He's big and strong, maybe not so bright. And one of them has got like animal instincts because they put in like animal DNA and he's got like super senses. And one of them is really smart, and one of them is a really good sniper and stuff like that. But it's a fun show. And I often tell people it may be animated, but that doesn't mean it's for kids. These stories, Clone Wars and Bad Batch and Rebel, are stories that are deep adult stories in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the Star Wars version of the Animatrix or the animated Star Trek show. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The animated Star Trek show was a little bit more kid oriented, but yes, it still had some pretty adult themes to it, and the stories and the characters and everything. And they are canon. Right? Because if you think about it, when you saw Rogue One, the chopper from Rebels, the droid, was in Rogue One, and so was the Ghost, the ship. And then Ahsoka was from Clone Wars, and she's getting her own series later this year. And Sabine Wren and I forget the captain of the Ghost. Those 2 characters are going to be live action characters now in the Ahsoka series. And so all of this stuff to me is and that's where the Darksaber came from Mandalorian, right? So for most people, they're like, I don't understand what's this black lightsaber that they had at the beginning. Everybody who'd watched Clone Wars is like, oh my gosh, it's the Darksaber. we were, for us who were big Rebels fans and things like that, we were just like going crazy about seeing that black blade come out of that TIE fighter, and we're like, was amazing.
So my big question is Jar Jar canon? Yes,
Jar Jar is canon. Although I will have to admit, I'll have to try to find this and put it in the show notes. There was a video that they did at Dragon Con many years ago called Sith Apprentice. Have you guys seen this?
Yes.
It's based off of The Apprentice that Donald Trump used to do a long, long time ago. And the idea is that Donald Trump is Palpatine, right? He's Darth Sidious, right? And he's picking his next apprentice, and he's got he's narrowed down to 4 candidates. He's got Jar Jar Binks, He's got Darth Maul, he's got Darth Tyrannus, and he's got Darth Vader, right? And of course, they've got them all sitting there, and he's like, starts with Jar Jar Binks, and he's like, Jar Jar, you did vote me supreme ultimate power in the Senate, but I'm afraid. And then Jar Jar's like, Misa fired? And he's like, no, Yusa fried. And then he force lightnings him kind of thing. But yeah, Sith Apprentice is well worth going. Oh yes, well worth going out there. And Mick, you mentioned the Undercover Boss skit with Adam Driver. Absolutely hilarious, these things that are out there. And hey, we have a former coworker as well who's got her fan film, but she's calling it episode 10, is getting ready. It's called, you can go to Beyond the Sequels. I think beyondthesequels.com, but it's also a Twitter handle, Beyond the Sequels, and she's got her trailer is up for episode 10, which is really cool. So
wow. Very cool.
But gentlemen, it has been an absolute pleasure. Mick, Brian, thank you so much for being out here today. Mick, especially being our guest. And I want to encourage everybody that if you've liked the podcast, if you've enjoyed the podcast, listen more to the podcast. Listen to the podcast multiple times, because you never know, you might learn something new the second time you listen to it. Okay, but do like and subscribe and tell your friends about it. We do this as a labor of love, but we do hope to reach many people and teach them a little bit about the cloud that's out there. So until next time, I will bid everybody adieu.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Mick.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.